Okay, we are officially going live. So, good evening, everybody. I am just so excited for another one once again, another panel. And we are very fortunate to have another session today. This week was representation in the media and social politics. And yesterday we had an absolutely amazing panel. And today we have another great one. And can't wait to get started. We are waiting for one more panelist to come on. And then we have one panelist right now. Is actually a very special one. He is actually my husband. Who has graduated. Well, I'll let him tell him about himself when it comes to international politics, which is his specialty. So my name is Kaveena Miller. I am the CEO and founder of KandidKaveena LLC. This is our Black History Month conference launch that we're doing. And these are just sessions that we're going to be doing beyond Black History Month, but it was a great way to start off. And so I'm very excited. So what we're gonna do very quickly, so Akeem, you can go ahead and you can kind of like introduce yourself, like where you're from, what you do, how you got involved in politics, things like that. And then when Joe comes on, we'll have our next panelist come on, and then he's going to talk about it. And he's going to talk about a little bit about himself. And then we're going to talk, go right to the questions. So knock yourself out, brag about yourself, because I know you won't. So go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening to you, Mrs. Miller. It is a pleasure to be here and a pleasure for you to have me on your platform. My name is Akeem Miller. I am currently a middle school teacher at St. Benedict's Preparatory School. I studied international political science at King University. Graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2016. The reason why I chose to study international political science was because growing up, I did not see much representation in the government and in political systems. And I wanted to be part of that representation and voice, an advocate for youth, because that's what I also specialize on the side is youth advocation, especially youth in the inner city, seeing that I am teaching currently in the inner city. And I wanted to do international because I also wanted people to get a perspective of what was there just besides what you were seeing in front of you. I believe politics is not just something we can understand in our community, but something we need to understand on a global scale, because there's so many other things that affects the way we think, the way we view the world, not just domestically, but globally. And it's better to have a holistic view of the world than have a narrowed-minded view of what is going on in front of you. So I'll start by saying that I studied in China my senior year, and I graduated from King University in Wenzhou. I was the only African-American of my class that graduated from a public Sino University in China. Also, I went back to China to live there for about 2 years, almost 2.5 years, to teach. And the experience there was mainly for me to get acclimated with China and US politics. I also did a leadership seminar at Harvard University that would help bridge the gap between US and China relations. In 2012, President Obama created this initiative because of the US and China tensions. And as you guys can see, in our current political climate, we are trying to repair that relationship that we have with China currently, especially with the new administration in office. So my focus has been on U.S. and China relations, but I also am well versed in um, local politics because I've served on local campaigns such as Cory Booker's senatorial campaign, as well as Josh Thompson's mayoral campaign, which was in 2016. So I have also served as a field officer in all of these campaigns. So I have been previewed to local politics as well as international politics. And that's why I'm here to share not just my view of my community, but a worldwide view of what I believe globally, especially in the African American community, what how important social politics is in our community. So thank you again for having me.
Yes, so as you can see, definitely having a lot going on, doing a lot, have been doing a lot. And it's very, very fortunate that we can have somebody of his caliber on here. So unfortunately, Joe will not be able to join us this evening, but it looks like we are going to just have a conversation back and forth with the questions, a little husband-wife tag team going on here for all the viewers. So KandidKaveena team gets a very special treat tonight because he usually likes to keep his head in the background when it comes to KandidKaveena kind of help me out behind the scenes. But it's important. We actually have these conversations pretty often, just off camera, obviously, but with both of us being educators, both of us traveling, both of us, living in the same world, the same field. We both see what's on the news, and then we come home and we're like, did you see what happened on the news or on social media or between our friends? So we already have these conversations. So now it's just going to be a more formal setting, and it's going to be where we get to educate people, and we get to see, hear from somebody who has a little bit more expertise than I would in this area. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started with the first question. I want you to describe your thoughts and opinions of social politics in the Black community.
So social politics, it falls under a wide umbrella, especially in when we look at the African American community. We try to figure out what is it in the African American community that's important for us right now to focus on. Is it our right to vote? Is it the Black Lives Movement, where we see police are brutally and unfairly targeting African Americans? So in our community, I believe for us, politics has had this stigma for a long time, where it is Black people have always supported one party, which is the Democratic Party, and we've always been against the Republican Party, and that has been a stigma in our community for quite some time. And the reason why it has been seen as a stigma is because we see one party making more of an effort to reach the Black community. I even think you've heard it before in the news where Joe Biden came out and said, if you don't vote for me, then you're not Black. And while in our community we may seem as though that the Democratic Party is the Black Party, that's not necessarily the case. We are not all a monolith. We all have different party views and different political views. In our community, we need to learn how to focus on what are our needs, and are those candidates meeting our needs. The second thing I believe we need to focus on is our representation. Are we being represented by the candidates who are serving us? And I'm not just talking about representation in terms of policies. I'm talking about representation in terms of our race, culture, traditions. Are the people who are in office and in power a reflection of who they are serving? And this even goes to policing our communities. Are we employing the people who serve in our communities and understand our communities? And part of the reason why I got into politics is because I did not see representation. In my field, foreign service officer, it's where I first actually saw a Black person as a diplomat. And we look at the United Nations, which is basically a hub for diplomats of all races to represent their country and their background and their race. Whereas we look at the White House, we don't see as much representation in the White House. Asian Americans, African Americans, Latino Americans. Do we see enough of a representation in these communities? And I think we need to start taking charge in the Black community, especially, of if we are not being served the way that we need to serve, we need to demand more of our officials. And the only way we demand more of our officials is if we lose our political voice. And we have to realize our political voice is our power to vote. And the only way we encourage each other is to actually have these conversations that we're having now, so everyone can understand how to use their political voice in the correct way.
It's interesting that you say that. Like, I was thinking about like our generation, and then I was thinking about, different generations talking about the voting, especially with the 2016 and the 2020 elections were probably some of the most crucial elections that we've ever had, or it's been a while since we've had something like that in our US history. So I'm curious, and it's going a little bit out of the way, but since you're on the topics of like voting and positive representation in the Black community when it comes to people who are in office, which makes more of a difference than people may think, how do you feel when people say, voting doesn't change anything, or, all politicians are corrupt, so what's the point of me trusting it, or I don't need to vote, like stuff like that? Because we've often heard it in our own circles and in our own generation. But, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard it countless times in my circle, whereas we feel as though voting doesn't really have a benefit, and that really just comes from our view of always being oppressed all the time, I believe. But in actuality, there's a lot of power in the Black vote. If we look throughout the course of the let's say 2008 elections, when President Obama was being elected, it was the Black votes that brought him over to the top to be in office. If we look at just as recent 2020 elections, the Black vote was the vote that voted President Trump out of the office. We are the swing. I know we look at the swing states, and yes, I understand there is electoral college, but really Black voters are the ultimate swing, because if we don't get out there and we don't show our voice and we don't go ahead and vote, we are not allowing our electoral officials to make the right decisions in the best interest of us, right? So this is why it's important to educate ourselves about what candidates are representing us in the correct way. And to answer your question about how do I feel about it, I look at it throughout history, because I'm also a novice when it comes to history, and I learned we've been studying John Lewis. John Lewis recently passed away last year, and I don't think some of us actually can grasp how much of a significance he played in the Black community. It was a historic event for when John Lewis marched on the Edmunds Pettus Bridge, because that was a turning point in history that allowed Black voters to gain the right to vote, because it was now televised that we were being treated unfairly. And if it wasn't for the courage of people like John Lewis, Dr. Martin Luther King, Reverend Abernathy, Rosa Parks, if it wasn't for their courage and everything and all the and blood, sweat, and tears that they put into being able to grant us just the right to vote, we wouldn't be able to go to the polls right now. They wouldn't have been any President Barack Obama if it wasn't for the Edmonds Pettus Bridge March that galvanized President Lyndon B. Johnson to enact the voting rights for us. So it's really, if you're not voting, it's kind of like, for me, you're not appreciating your ancestors and the pain and the struggle that they've went through to give you your right personally. And this is why I encourage a lot of youths, because I hear it usually from people who are younger than me, saying my vote really doesn't count. And I have to feel the need to educate them, to let them know, like, did you know that, people were tear gassed, people were beaten, so you can have the right to say, no, you don't want to vote. Let alone you didn't, if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't even have a right or a voice or a political voice. And you would just have to deal with whatever consequences or whatever anyone chose was best for you, right? Now you have a choice, and now you're giving up that choice. It's heartbreaking, and it's disheartening to hear people sometimes say that they don't want to have the right to vote, for me personally, because I know the struggles that our ancestors been through.
And something that you said that I kind of want to go back on a little bit. You said, people were tear gassed and beaten just to have a say of who's in office. Like, I feel like no one's really understanding that concept. That's a really drastic thing, really traumatic thing to go through, just for us to go inside of a booth to check off a box. That's a big deal. And my question is why? It's because the real change happens when people are in those positions. And I feel like a lot of people, or maybe it's just not taught to us very much, where they're like, oh, you could be the next president, the president, the president, the president. I'm like, yeah, of course you could be the next president. That'd be cool, But we really need to see people in Congress. Who are your mayors, your Congress, your representatives? Who are those? We have to, I feel like, really need to start paying attention as a Black community to those people. Fight and learn to go up and be those type of people. Learn to be in the U.S. Embassy and to be representatives of the United States. Like, go in those positions as well. Don't just think president and vice president are the only things politically that you can do or run, or like, oh, I'm just going to run for mayor, but they're all corrupt. I feel like there's a stigma amongst the Black community when it comes to politics and stuff like that. So it's interesting that you did bring that up. Shifting gears a little bit, because I had to tackle the voting part, and that was actually really important. Something we don't talk about, especially young people. We tend to kind of, oh yeah, I know. It's like, we really need to have a conversation about it. So shifting gears a little bit, since it is Representation in the Media Week, because like Family Matters, I do want to ask like a few things when it comes to how you view social politics on the media, and not so much film and TV, but social media. You're not a social media like person per se, but you are on social media just like we all are, or it doesn't have to be anything major. But we know what's going on. We see what happens when we scroll. Everybody scrolls, I feel like today. My Nana was scrolling and she liked something. I was like, what are you doing on Facebook? Everybody is scrolling today. Doesn't matter how old you are. So with this new generation, we're seeing, and I think you had said it, the desensitizingness of social media and what it's done to the Black community when it comes to a lot of things, not just the police shootings, but maybe we're not seeing ourselves represented the correct way, a whole bunch of things. So I do want to ask, how has social media actually become an outlet for Black voices? So what positives do you see? And then what negative connotations do you see when it comes to seeing Black people represented on social media?
So like you said, I'm not a social media connoisseur. You know, I believe too much of it is not good for you, and too little of it is not necessarily a bad thing either. But I do see politics playing out in the social media. And social media has actually changed the game for politics, being so that now it seems as though your political view is closely linked to what your news feed looks like. Um, for a long time, politics was seen as something boring and uninteresting. And the only way you can get that information is if you go to 60 Minutes or CNN or Fox News 5. But now you can scroll through your timeline, and whoever you're following, that algorithm is going to match up, and that's going to influence your political view. There's no longer um, a need to go and look at the extent outsiding sources to figure out what's going on with my candidate. You know, who should I support? Your mind is kind of already made up just based of what you're scrolling to see. And even now, um, social media has allowed us has basically invited us into our home. Politics has entrenched our homes, and we look at former President Trump. Um, he uses Twitter, or used to use Twitter before he was banned, to tweet a lot of his opinions. And you know, when he was elected, um, a lot of people had a lot of questions, particularly in the African American community. How could this be? I don't understand. How did he get elected? Where did America go wrong? And I think what was special, or what maybe special is not the word to say, but what was interesting to see was that unlike other candidates, President Trump was leveraging his power of social media to get through people. So people naturally felt as though, well, I can't possibly be being lied to, right? Because no one that would lie would talk to me and be this relatable. And that's what he became. He became relatable because he didn't want to hold his opinion, and he didn't want to have a filter. So people naturally felt comfortable with former President Trump because of the way he communicated, regardless of how candid he might have been through his tweets, or frank he might have been through his tweets. We have never seen that before with a president, where someone can leverage the power of social media. So now, when we look on social media and we're seeing all these tweets by Trump or other candidates making tweets about what's going on, you start to feel as though they're relatable, and you start to think like, maybe government, there's a lot more transparency now. And even our younger generation, when I was growing up, politics didn't become interesting to me until I was probably around my 20s. Now in this younger generation, politics has become more of a trend. Well, I understand this is what's going on in the world. It becomes more of, all right, I see what the trends are on social media, and I understand them because I know what my candidates are putting out. And a lot of candidates, if you're not behind time, it's probably why, sad to say, one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race was probably because of the times. You saw in his campaigns, he was really trying to keep up with the times and become relatable. You know, we would see Bernie put on a sweater. Oh, Bernie changed some clothes today. Nice. It becomes a lot more difficult for candidates to, if you're not using social media now, such a huge marketing tool and a huge way to make you relatable in today's society. If you're not using that, it becomes a lot harder for the candidate to be elected. And social media is also how we convey our stories. And the way we convey our stories is what makes us relatable, especially those candidates. So, in terms of the African American community and how they view everything, it's already predetermined just based off of your timeline.
There we go. So yes, something I definitely have to agree with, and somebody had put it in the chat. The Trump administration really took advantage of the Twitter platform, which, you know, I'm not going to say I like it, but I have to admit that they did. And it's something that you can't run away from nowadays. I feel like now, even something like, you know, celebrities is not part of this conversation. But when I look at celebrities, I had typed something, commented under a celebrity photo or something, and they responded. Usually celebrities are untouchable. You don't go near them. They're way, you know, over there, and we're way over here, down here. You don't touch the celebrities. You don't talk to them unless they talk to you. It's not like that anymore. There's more of a, oh, you eat and drink water just like me. You're a human just like me. You have family just like me. Oh, okay. It makes it not so praiseworthy. And I feel like that's something with politicians now, especially with, you know, former President Trump. Um, the good side of it is you see young people taking advantage of politics in their social media every day. Like you said, the younger generation is way more involved in politics than we were. And I wasn't involved in politics. The only time I really was when Obama was about to get in office and we had to do a project of, you know, well, he wasn't president then, Senator Obama and John McCain. So, you know, really excited because he looked like me, or he looked like my dad, or he looked like somebody in my family. And we knew it was such a big deal. The first Black president, and like Black first lady, was the first Black family in United States history. After that, when he was in office, it was kind of like I kind of let everything go over my head. I didn't really pay attention to it, probably like I should, because even with our generation, there was no, let me go on Facebook and look at the news. There was no, let me scroll on Instagram and see what's happening. I don't even think, we didn't even have Instagram until I think like early college, you know. But now this generation coming up, they see everything. There's no more, your parents are watching TV at 6 o'clock news and they know what's going on, and you're just children. They're so involved now with politics that I feel like they can definitely use it to their advantage. And kind of going a little bit back to the voting thing, if you want change, use those platforms, because people are more willing to listen to you on social media than they would anything else, inside of a classroom, out on the street, anywhere. They're more willing to see what's going on social media. What are the trends, you know, on TikTok or whatever. And then the downside of that is sometimes you can kind of get lost in what it should look like on social media instead of what you're actually trying to accomplish, which is change. So those are two kind of parallels that I was thinking about when you were saying that. So there's definitely a lot of pros and cons that you can look at it, you know, from the Black perspective. But I definitely had to tackle that. And then kind of moving into media and the Black perspective and how to use social media for change. We all saw Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter has been around for quite some time. They're not new. But the Black Lives Matter movement came about even strongly after the tragic death of George Floyd last year. And it was something that took over the world. It wasn't just like a United States thing or like Cincinnati thing or Jersey thing or whatever. It took over the world, which is something I don't think we've ever seen before in history. So I do want you, in your personal view, as a young Black man, somebody who's, you know, heavily involved and used to seeing these things and working closely in the community, describe how the Black Lives Matter movement transcribed in the media and what were your perspectives when you saw it?
So the Black Lives Matter movement has been depicted in several ways through media. It almost feels as though there's two separate Black Lives Matter movements going on in the media. There's the violent rioting Black Lives Matter movement, and then there's the peaceful protesting Black Lives Matter movement. And it's almost as if the violent rioting always outweighs the good and the peaceful protesting from the Black Lives Matter movement. It's actually very interesting. I read an article the other day that said about 90, I think it was around 93% of Black Lives Matter movement's protests are peaceful. And people are very quick to say, well, you shouldn't riot. Rioting is wrong. We look at the case of Ahmaud Arbery when those riots started, and we look at the case of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. When those things happened, people were in an uproar because no one was being held accountable. So, and then we look at what happened in Minneapolis, and all of these rioting and the violence has now been associated with the Black Lives Matter movement, but no one is really willing to say or understand or be held accountable. And all of the anger and frustration from not being heard and constantly being oppressed is being spilled in the streets. And as a result of constantly being ignored, this is what happens, right? But let's not forget what the main purpose of the Black Lives Matter movement was or is about. The Black Lives Matter movement started as a stand against police brutality. And we've now been able to get galvanized on a global scale of what the Black Lives Matter movement ever since the killing of George Floyd. And in social media now, we see, or in media period, we see that people are now saying, are standing up, well, all lives matter. And then you have the All Lives Matter protests, but Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. And if you don't understand that a core group is being targeted and being treated unfairly and unjustly in today's society, then all lives can't matter. You have to make sure that and hold accountable. I keep going back to accountability of what was written in the Constitution, that all men are created equally. We have to make sure we hold those truths accountable. And if it's not being held accountable, then we have to address it. And then there's the issue of racism. Can we solve the issue of racism, right? I think when we look at the perspective of racism, there is no solution to racism. People might say, oh, well, you got to educate people, right? But education, sometimes you can give somebody the information, but people will always hold their truth or their opinion to something. Racism has to be addressed. I'm not sure if it can be solved, but it has to be addressed. And the way we address racism is have someone to challenge your thinking, have someone to have these conversations. And you can't force someone not to be racist. You have to address what has been happening and continue to speak your truth and address your truth until and give them the information. You're not forcing it, but give them the information and allow them to make the decision on what is occurring.
And I like what you said. One thing can't matter until the other thing matters. And, it's hard to say all lives matter. Yeah, we never said that all lives didn't matter, of course. But when a certain group target is being hit significantly more than the other, and it seems to be a repetitive action, and it dates back to 17, 16, 1500s, there's a problem. When it keeps happening, it just looks different. This isn't new, seeing this in the media is like, oh my gosh. It's like, no, we've been killed like this for thousands of years now. You know?
Sorry, and you just touched on it. This has been happening for years. The lack of accountability. I was looking at the Emmett Till case the other day. Emmett Till happened about close to 66 years ago. And still to this day, no one has been ever held accountable for the murder of Emmett Till, even with confessions and recants of Caroline Bryant's testimony. She recanted her testimony. No one has still be held accountable for Emmett Till. So now we just have a lot of modern day Emmett Tills happening. It may not be to the same extent, but people are still not being held accountable for the murders of innocent young Black children. And it's quite sad that as a society that we're not holding each other accountable. And that's the message that we've been sending for way past 66 years. It's just a continuation in today's society.
Yeah, it seems to be in a circling manner. It seems to be rotating. And when you think about Emmett Till, it's like, 14, and then you think about Tamir Rice, it's like, well, both of their lives didn't matter. And that's kind of the whole point. It has nothing to do with, one simple factor. Right. Somebody in the comments saying, it's the same act with a new face. It really is. There's nothing different from what was happening back in the 60s than it is now. Nothing different. It just looks different. Maybe, not even, because we were being attacked by police way before social media, way before Rodney King be able to capture it on video, way, way, way before that. So, it seems to just be something that's circling, but the difference is now, I think it's not that the numbers have increased of Black people being killed, and that's why there's an uproar. We're just able to see it on a loop. I think that's just the difference, that we're able to press play over and over and over and over. You can look up something right now. You can't look up anything that happened to Emmett Till. There was no video cameras. Same age, same thing, but there's something different when the media is involved now, today. So it's interesting that you bring up Emmett Till, because a lot of people think, oh, that happened so long ago. That was so long ago. No, it wasn't. No, it was not. It was not that long ago. It's still happening now. I think recently the case was reopened. Right? The case was reopened recently, a couple years ago, or last year, or it closed last year.
Yeah, it closed last year. It was reopened in 2017.
That's recent. And we think of it as, it's not relatable to today, but it is. Same thing is that Black lives to other people don't matter. That's the whole point,
Right. And I had a question. Someone said to me, well, haven't we been addressing racism? And I want people to know that we've been addressing the systems in racism, but racism itself is something embedded in people. So, when we look at the unarmed killings of Black people, I looked at a statistic the other day. I'm not sure if the numbers are still the same, but it was around 33% of Black people that were killed were unarmed. And this was with footage, body cameras. This was with cell phone footage being recorded. Well, aren't we addressing it? No, we're addressing the system, right? We can put all these things in place. We can put as much body cameras as we want. We can record as many live video footage as we want. But you can see, as we all can still see today, look at George Floyd, look at Ahmaud Arbery. When the evidence is presented, there is still the fact that some of us are still not willing to accept that we're in a racist society. It's almost impossible to say, oh, well, maybe there's a justification for this. And the way we address racism, it's embedded in that person. You have to address it and bring it out forth with that group core of people, right? You just can't address the system. The system is not going to fix things, right? You can implement as many policies and roles. I believe it was, I'm not sure if it was Hillary Clinton, but I think was either Hillary Clinton or another politician that said, you can't legislate care. You can't write a law that says you have to legislate or care about Black people. You can't do that. It has to be addressed with each and every individual.
I'm gonna do like what I did yesterday with one of our panelists, Dr. Steven, had came on and said, if you can't find the front door open for an opportunity, use the side door. And I told her I was gonna quote her and put her on a t-shirt. I'm not gonna put this one on a t-shirt, but I did like this quote, like, you can't legislate care. You have to, and I feel like this is all connected, because when you think about what's going on, you have to look at, well, who's in charge here? And then that's when you go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, we were talking about, you have to get people in there that's going to actually make change and actually care for everybody. There's no, slick ways or anything like that, no corruption. And I was thinking about American Skin. We watched that. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but that movie I feel like it's not even a movie. I feel weird to even call it a movie. I feel like it's a piece of moving literature that everybody needs to look at. It's not simply a film like, oh, that was nice, that was cute. But no, that was, that was something that took me back a little bit watching it. And I feel as if we have the things on camera, we have social media now we have to get the people in the office to actually make the change. So I thought about American Skin. If you haven't seen American Skin, I highly suggest that you watch it. It's something that we talked about for a couple of days after watching it, after we saw the film. So yeah, a lot of heavy hitting stuff tonight is all I'm gonna say. A lot. It's hard to tackle it, in a such short amount of time. But something that I want to just very briefly, I guess, touch upon, something that I found interesting was how the Black Lives Matter movement relates to the Black Power movement in the 70s. Now, I know a lot of people will think because of the Black Panthers, it's like, something different, but the Black Panthers was part of the Black Power movement, but there's a lot of similarities that people may not want to see. So I do want to touch a little bit about that and explain how images in the media have changed about Black and African Americans when it comes to these Black Power movements. Because back in the 70s, you would see Black Power kind of how my hair is now. It's just like, you don't care. This is how it grows out of my scalp, so this is what it's gonna look like. You walking around with your fists. It's like, I'm proud of my skin. I'm proud of our culture. It was more of like a taken ownership thing. And then you have the Black Lives Matter, which their motives of their messages might be a little bit different, because we just want police officers and people to stop killing us. But Black Lives Matter means the way you look matters, the way you sound matters, you as a person matters. And I'm curious to see what your opinions are when it comes to those two correlating when it comes to images, as far as images go.
So James Brown has a song called Say It Loud, and it goes something like, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. That goes back to the Black Power movement. Black Power movement was an anti-racist movement. Black Power movement was dedicated to calling out racism. And Black Power movement actually addressed the issues of racism and the systems of racism as well. The Black Power movement was Black people taking back their pride and their culture and who they are, and standing up for what was right. We were standing up for each other. We were bonding with each other. And obviously, the forces that be didn't like that we were bonding together and that we were coming together, because we were standing against what was wrong, and we knew what was right and what we decided and how we should be treated, right? So in the media, we look at it as, the Black Panther was a huge part of the Black Power movement, which they were. And the forces that be, when we look at people galvanizing and standing up for what they're right, there's an old war tactic where we use in chess, which is, if you can get the king or whoever's leading that party, if you can eliminate them, everything else falls, right? And it's very important because now it feels as though Black people have always been playing handicap ever since our leaders have been removed from our community. We've always been having to play with one arm behind our back or with one leg in a race, running a race where it seems as though the path was already set out for us, right? I think you said a quote earlier, if you can't use the front door, try the side, right? We don't have access. And I think that's why we started these movements, is because we were realizing that access to these institutions and access and have rights were not even just limited, they were non-existent. So it was now, when we were trying to call out these things that were happening in today's society, we call it out and we speak up about it, people are now upset, and now they're looking to target the leader who's calling these shots, and now they become a target in our community, and now we don't have a leader. And I think what was so special about the Black Power movement is that we had leaders in our community. Not to say that Black Lives Matter, we don't have leaders, but it's kind of difficult now to pinpoint who our leaders are in the Black Lives Matter movement, because we have so many different faces, so many different opinions about the Black Lives Matter movement as opposed to Black Power movement. But in terms of the similarities, they both called out and spoke against racism and the systems that oppressed us.
Yeah, I was looking at what somebody had said, how the Black Power movement was meant for safety, something that was not available for Black people. I felt like we never felt safe, and when you say, I'm proud and I'm Black, you do feel a comfort among, that you can get. And something interesting you said, when you take out their leader, then that's when things start to crumble. And I feel like the images of the leaders that we had back then is something that we seem to be lacking nowadays. It's like, okay, we had President Obama. He wasn't a leader of a specific movement. He was the president of the United States, leader of the free world. It was a little different. So we have President Obama. If somebody in the chat can name me right now somebody like a Malcolm X or a Fred Hampton or a Dr. King, if somebody can name me somebody, that we have right now, maybe I'm missing somebody, but I can't seem to think of anyone, some type of leader that we have now to kind of help with those things. They may be in smaller communities and they're in our communities. I'm not saying we have absolutely zero leaders anywhere, but I'm saying somebody to kind of gather together nationwide and worldwide, something that Dr. King did. An example like that. If somebody could put it in the chat, we can definitely, bring that up. But it was interesting what you said. Not many people think about that. And I remember we had spoke about that quite a few times before. And thinking about it now, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I can't really think of anyone that I can mention that's our leader or a type of leader, main one right now, or different leaders that can come together. You don't see it quite often. So it's interesting to bring that up. And we do need more. I'm not saying we don't have any, but we definitely need more. So, yeah. Let me look at the time here. We're doing good on time. We're doing good. Still trying to get down to something I'm very curious to ask you in particular. And I don't know not which one to do, but very, very curious to ask you. But right now, the word systemic racism seems to be, I feel like it's a little used a little too loosely. Oh, there's systemic racism, there's systemic racism. And does anybody know what it really means when systemic racism happens? That means even trickling down to what type of food you buy is systemic racism. So I'm curious to see what your personal definition of systemic racism is. Somebody being in the field and knowing about these conversations when it comes to politic relations in the Black community. What is your definition of systemic racism, and how do you feel about it, how it's been circulating in America specifically today, like recently?
So the term systemic racism stems from actually having a system that is set up against your race. And in particularly, it's used in the African American community, where we see certain limitations and certain hindrance in how we can obtain or achieve certain things in our society. We look at education. If we look at education, where do we see systemic racism in our education? Well, we can look at the inner cities. I teach in the inner city currently. Luckily, the school that I teach at, we have a graduation rate of, I believe it's around 96%. But in our community, the crime rate is one of the highest. So we have a 1 in 28 chance of being a victim of a crime here in Newark, right? And when you grow up in a certain environment where things are kind of charted for you, your path is already charted out for you. It's well, if I can't make it in high school, then I got to make some money. If I got to make some money, then I got to figure out how am I going to get that money. Well, I'm not going to get the money on getting a 9-to-5 job. If somebody doesn't give me a job, then I have to figure out what's my other solution. If my other solution is selling drugs because I can't get a 9-to-5 job, that plays a role in systematic racism, because we don't have the access now. When these doors are shut on us, we have no other choice but to try to look for other avenues. It's sad that some of those other avenues have to result in, looking into crime or selling drugs. But this is the sad reality that we live in, where not everybody has been blessed to have the same opportunities, and not everyone has been blessed to have the same types of access, right? And so that's just one example of what systemic racism is, right? Like you mentioned before, racism in terms of food. There's a reason why we have a chicken shack and a liquor store next to each other. There's a reason why we have a fast food restaurant, a McDonald's built across the street from a liquor store. These things are set up and designed on purpose to keep you trapped within that community. And part of the reason why I decided to study abroad is because I wanted to broaden my horizon. And I also wanted people to know, and I also wanted to be an example to my people, that you don't want to be narrow-minded and stuck into an environment where you don't feel you can't find a way out. There is a way out. There's absolutely a way out. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take some effort, and it's going to take It's going to take access and having the right people and surrounding yourselves in those right situations, right? Um, it's a difficult um, it's difficult to see our people subjected to these types of circumstances, because naturally, as African American, I wish everybody was granted the same rights and equals. So I run a nonprofit that talks about mental health, and um, in the nonprofit we addressed where's the source in all of this. How does this even design? How can we catch it before any of this happens, right? So we've pinpointed between the ages of 14 to 25 are very crucial, because a lot of mental health illnesses start between those ages. And we've already have the cards stacked against us. But if we can prevent some of these things and take care of ourselves and educate ourselves, especially take care of our physical health, not just mental, but our physical health, because studies have shown in order to be uh, completely well-rounded, you need both your mental and your physical health. Oftentimes we talk about mental, but we have to pair the two, because it helps us to start thinking about what are some better solutions to the problems that we're facing, right? And actually seeking those solutions. And we've devised sort of like a leadership training and leadership plan where we can have each other do peer-to-peer counseling. Oftentimes, when you're communicating with your friend about your problems, we keep it bottled in. We don't know how to talk to somebody unless um, you have some types of substance that you want to use as an enabler. But we have to learn how to express ourselves in our community, right? So we already know that the cards are stacked against us. Now we have to figure out, how do we rise above these things, all right? So um, at the end of the day, there is systemic racism, and we do have to hold those people accountable. Um, but we also have to hold ourselves accountable as much as we can as a Black people, because no one seems like as though they're going to do it for us. So we have to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, and even thinking about that in a sense of, how does all this relate to politics or social politics? What does what I eat and what's in my neighborhood have to do with politics? Well, that's everything is set up and designed. It's nothing's on purpose where you go to certain communities and they just so happen to have it. And I didn't stay in an area too long that you're referring to, but I did enough to, remember it. You go out of my house, you go down the street, there's the chicken shack, there's the liquor store. Like everything was right there. And then the more I moved, more towards the suburbs, I was like, you have to drive, I don't know how far just to find a McDonald's. It's like, you know, instead there's a fruit market closer than there is a McDonald's or a Wendy's or anything. And forget a chicken shack, I don't even think they know what that is. So everything is purposefully designed. And one of the comments that I see here is saying that the system hasn't been set up to help African Americans from the beginning. It's just something that was never meant for us. They never intended us to be um, free in all aspects. Maybe we're not physically in shackles. We're not there's certain things that are not happening, but it is happening in other fields like mass incarceration and how the food we eat and our health. So many areas that were still being affected. So it was never intended for us to make it in the same level that our white counterparts are making it. So I found that comment like really interesting. Um, and schools, anything you can think of, I can trickle it down to systemic racism. Anything you can name, anything, and people are like, it's a conspiracy theory. It's like, no, it's not. But if let's switch it. If you're the one that is afraid of somebody taking your job, wouldn't you do everything possible to make sure that they stay down and you stay up? That's just usually how it goes. And a lot of people may not want to admit it, but you know I I find it to be true. So I saw that comment, and I hope that person doesn't mind that I kind of put it out there. But it's interesting to see that everybody seems to have the same thoughts around systemic racism. And they said even in the Constitution, like, change needs to happen, rebuilding needs to happen, the laws need to change. The Constitution was definitely not made for African Americans. They were not made for females. It was not made. It was only made for white males, white heterosexual males, to be specific. That is a very specific category that they meant for that Constitution, not for everybody else. So I had to definitely mention that real quick.
I do want to comment on that second half where they stated that for the system to change, I would think we need to rebuild and change laws and even the Constitution. For the system to change, we need each other. Rebuilding, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but if they haven't rebuilt for 500 years, I don't see the progress of them starting to rebuild any soon. So there's another quote that says, if you want to change the game, learn how to play it. If you want to understand the system, systemic racism, you kind of have to play by the rules. And once you play by the rules, you can understand where the traps are, where the dead stops are. And once you navigate your way out, you now have the ability to change those things because now you're educated on the system and where the flaws are, if that makes sense. So while it would have been nice to have officials and think about rebuilding and changing laws, we have to learn how to navigate the system that we're in and learn where the pit stops are, learn where the trap doors are, learn where we don't have access, and then figure out how do we begin to change those things. And that happens even in our education system. I saw there was an article that came out the other day that there's a school in Utah that is opting out of Black History Month. Well, why would that be an option? Why would you want to opt out of Black History Month? Well, this is part of the system, right? Part of the system is to not educate our next generation about our history, because everybody knows if you are educated about your history, you can now bring a new light to what was such a dark past, right? So this all plays into that systemic racism, right? People are saying, oh, Black History Month should be optional now. That is part of systemic racism. So again, you have to learn how to recognize these things and be aware of them so we can call them out and address it. Because if it's up to us, our history will be swept under the rug, and we wouldn't be able to navigate our way out of this maze, this elaborate maze. But yes, there's certainly hope. I don't ever want people to think that there's no hope that any things will change. There's certainly hope. There are a lot of people working to address these issues, but with anything, change takes time. And we have actually been a much more progressive generation, but which is why it's equally more important to make sure that the generation that's going to come behind us is educated about these things. Because as you can see, they are able to leverage the power of the media as opposed to what we were able to do growing up. So there's a lot of empathy that's involved in this newer generation than there's ever been, I believe. But they have to be guided in the right sense in order to change these systems.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I would have to say, I have to agree with that. And something that we need to remember, I want to reiterate what you said. We need to stick together a lot of time. Now, I'm not putting this out there saying that Black people don't know how to stick together. I don't think that's not true. I think that there's been a lot of things set up so that we don't have to go to each other. I don't have to go to somebody Black for this business or whatever, because there's something really good over here that has a white face to it, and I'm more comfortable with it because that's what's been put out there more. So I don't think that we're choosing to not go. I just think that things have been set up again for us not to go. But there was a shift in 2020 that happened, that I saw so many more Black um, owners and businesses and educators. So many have seemed to just pop up, one including myself, one including you. And if the more we stick together in all fields, when I think about these sessions this month, every single field you can think of, the medical field, law, what laws next week, law, education, STEM, politics, media, mental health. All of these different sessions are in different categories where we need to come together and talk and do things like this and see how can we make change in our own communities and then nationally. And but definitely we need to stick together in order for something to change, because the world is against us. That's not anything new. But if we're together, we're more powerful than we may realize. So it's important that you mentioned that. I am glad that you mentioned that. We do have a couple of questions that were popping up. So I'm going to ask you that. But before we do that, I do have like maybe one or two to kind of end out the questions I had for this session. Sen, what is your advice to the new generation of Black African Americans regarding social politics? So like their rights, freedoms, their voice, stuff like that.
For the new generation, we have to be careful with how we are interpreting the information that's out there. I don't want to say, can we change what we see? Probably not. Can we change the way we interpret it? Yes, definitely so. But we have to also make the effort in trying to get as much information as possible and not just taking things for face value. So when we're looking through social media and the way that we're viewing things, we need to figure out, is this part of the way my algorithm is set up for me to view things? Or perhaps I need something that's going to challenge my thinking. Or perhaps I need to see something else, something other than what I'm looking at, so I can get more information and actually try to interpret what I'm reading or what I'm receiving in a different manner. Just don't take what you're reading for face value. Seek, ask. Ask somebody that shares a completely different view than you. Ask a conservative. Why not? Don't just get the liberal opinion. And then at the end of the day, you have to learn how to make your own educated choice, right? And understand, once you seek and you've received all the information that you've received, make an educated choice and made a responsible and an accountable choice as a citizen.
Yes, I think I have said this before to my students. They're 18-year-olds, so they're a little bit older than your 7th and 8th graders. But I tell them, I'm like, do you actually click on what you see on social media and actually read the full article? Some people are like, no, not really. They just see the title and they just share it. It's very shareable, which is fine. We want to share information, but we want to start doing sharing the correct information and understand what you're sharing. And don't always believe what you see, like exactly what you said. And it was funny because I saw somebody share something before, and I can't think of specifically what it was about, but the date was like 2018, but it caused like a panic and everybody was commenting. And I was like, this was from like 3 years ago. Like, why are you sharing it now? Like, obviously you didn't go in the article and read it because this was from a long time ago. This doesn't even happen. So definitely don't believe everything that you see. And I'm speaking to mostly I won't say our generation completely. Most of the time, the older up you get, the more likely they are to actually read the full article. But for the younger generation, it's very quick. Everything's fast paced. I don't have time to read the full article because I have to scroll to the next thing and I have to jump to the next social media platform. But take the time and actually stop to see what you're sharing. You could be doing disservice and sharing things that aren't true and causing, panic, for no reason, or you could be sharing something really positive that can help somebody. It all depends. Last question before we get into the questions that were coming up from our audience. Well, you kind of already answered, like, can we change what we see? But is there a way to go against the grain of what media displays inaccurately and change our perspective of how we are represented in the media? And you kind of already answered that, like, we can change our perspective of things, but can we change what we actually see of what the media puts out there? Maybe not. Not really. They're going to do what they want to do, but how do we, our perspectives kind of change? So you answered that question a little bit. But the last thing I do want to ask is, what are some positives did you see occur out of 2020 when it comes to social politics? Or maybe not use the word 2020, or some might call it the worst year ever. But what positives did you actually see? End on a little bit of a lighter note.
Yeah, I was saying before too, we can probably change our algorithm. That way, if you don't like what you're seeing, you could always change the way you process the information through your algorithm. But some positives, definitely, I would say the Black Lives Matter movement, the way the Black Lives Matter movement has now been portrayed in the media, in terms of everywhere you go, whether it's down the street, you would see Black Lives Matter movement painted on the streets. You would see the names of people being painted on the streets and be remembered and memorialized. That is very crucial, that we keep these people in the forefront of whatever we are doing, and memorializing them and make sure their names are emblazoned on those streets, the same streets that took their lives, and to that matter, it actually sparked, like you said, the Black businesses are starting to support each other. I was scrolling through Uber Eats the other day and I saw a Black-owned business, and I was like, wow. It's that kind of acknowledgement and awareness that we need in society today. If we can get people to acknowledge that there is an issue and acknowledge why it is so important to support one another, especially in an African American community. And we have the support of not just our people, but we have allies outside of that. And it's very important that we do need these allies, because this is a collective effort. Somebody asked me the other day, well, how can I do anything if I'm white? Well, you actually have the power. You actually have the influence. You have the privilege. You can speak up and you will be heard. So advocate, because silence means you're part of it. So I've definitely seen a lot of positive come out of 2020 in terms of that, because I've seen a lot of more people speaking up and advocating for us. So although it was a challenging year, and like I said, we did show up to the polls, and that's always important. But I would also like to see our younger generation too being a little bit more involved. And I have a 14-year-old girl in my class who says to me, I'm going to support Black businesses. When I hear that, I'm like, wow, I'm blown away, because now I'm seeing with the generation that's upcoming, they're seeing the importance of their race and the importance of representation. So it gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yes, when you had told me that too. And it's even funny. It seems like a lot of the younger generation, like, oh, Black owned business? Cool. They're like running, to see it. And I'm like, I didn't even know what a Black owned business was at their age, yet alone like want to support it. Support it. It's amazing what is starting to um change. And something that's funny, my dad was saying, like, usually when you see a lot of pushback and a lot of angry people, you're probably causing some type of positive change that people don't like. So we may see, a lot of angry people, and we're seeing a lot going on, but that just means that we may be onto something. We may be on the way to change. I didn't see, people coming out with fire hoses, when Black people were trying to have their rights, and they handed them some pie. Like, it was like, oh no, it's like, oh, you're doing something good. You know what? Let me give you something. I'm sorry. That's not how it went. They physically abused them because they were trying to do something that caused change for Black people. That's what happened. So, you know, it's nothing new. But I do like ending on more of a positive note and seeing what positives came out of it. We know about the negatives. We want to know about the positives too, and have that blend. So one question that did pop up to ask the panelists here is, while social media has provided an opportunity for us to stay in tune with politics, what advice do you have for those that lean heavily on social media to filter out misinformation and disinformation? Which is a really good question.
Yes. So I actually had um, addressed an issue that I saw on social media where um, during the time it was actually relating to China and the African American community and how African Americans were being treated. Um, and while I am a big um, supporter because my job here is to make sure the U.S. and China relations are understanding of each other. My job is to also educate them and let them understand what are the facts and for them to make a decision on their own. Um, when you're seeing information on social media, it's incredibly difficult to filter out what is the truth because you're only seeing a portion of what is being presented of you. But as a citizen, it is your responsibility to um, interpret this information. But the way you interpret it, you have to make sure you are gathering the correct information, the correct facts. And the way you go about gathering the correct facts is, do some research. Like I said, speak to someone who is involved in what they're doing, right? Speak to the experts. Um, is there someone who can attest to some of these things that you're seeing? Is there someone who's in this field? You know, um, I saw a lot of myths about the COVID-19 virus out there, right? And you had a beautiful panel the other day that spoke about those myths, right? And you had a lot of people who were in that field debunk those myths. It's the same thing when you're scrolling through your social media feed and you're seeing all this other information. Who are the experts in this field? Who are the people you can go to and trust? And like I said, seek a different opinion too, not so that you can say that you're right, but seek a different opinion so you can understand, so you can be challenged on the way you're thinking. Right? Go see what the other side is thinking. That way you can make a conscious decision. See if it makes sense, right? And then make a conscious decision about what is right. And like I said, we have, as citizens, we have to have the responsibility of um, the way we interpret the information, right? And then, like you said, do your research.
Do your research is pretty much, I'm gonna name as probably the theme of the second portion of this webinar, is to do your research. And a lot of times we may think to do it because we're in educational spaces and we tend to be a little bit more curious. Um, like, oh, let me research this. And I'm specifically talking about the new generation, maybe everybody. Make sure you do your research about what's going on. This kind of goes back to, don't just look at the article and share it, actually read it, and then follow up with the people that are talking in it. Who are they? How are they credible? Who they could be random strangers. You don't know, but it is important to do your own research. And I really, really love that question. Shout out to the person who asked that question, who we know. And there's a lot of questions on how do we know what's true and what's not true nowadays. Research. Really, the main thing is really to research. There's no scientific method behind it. There's no theory. There's no strategy. Really, just to research. Look up credible things online, credible sources. If you don't know how to look up a credible source, scholarly articles, scholarly journals was something that we mentioned on the panel you were talking about a couple of weeks ago. Look up scholarly journals, scholarly articles, publications from universities, from tech companies, from corporate companies. That's how you know when you can kind of debunk all those myths. So thank you so much. This is, time always flies by no matter who's, on or anything. So there was a really great conversation with a lot of really great information that I hope people are able to absorb and really think about, tonight and moving forward. So this is the time now where you can go ahead and put projects, info, anything inside the chat to the panelists and to the attendees. That way they can, keep up with what you're doing, because you're doing such amazing work. And I know now I'm going to tell everybody that's on, next week is our last week of the conference. But it's not, I won't say it's the last that's ever going to happen. This isn't a Black History thing where it's February and then I don't talk about this stuff ever again. Definitely some things are in the works. So make sure that you are keeping up with what's going on with KandidKaveena, because we have a lot more stuff that's planned beyond February. But next week, we're going to be talking about Black law and Black wealth. Please, you don't want to miss it. Black law is going to be on Wednesday and Black wealth is going to be on Thursday. So definitely keep up with that. Make sure you register, make sure you spread the word, tell a friend, tell a family member. And to Mr. Akeem Miller, thank you so much for being on and giving us all of your knowledge and wisdom, and all the information. And definitely, let me see, right here. Oh, there we go. Oh, a little technical difficulty. I think the pipes are frozen outside. That's why it's so.
I'm back. Sorry.
No, you're fine. No, I was just saying that, next week we have the panels, and I was thanking you so much for being on. And it was really, really great. And here is the link to the website for those who need it. Let's put at I'll put right here where you can contact him, and he's doing a lot of great work in the community. And he won't say it about himself because that's how humble he is. So he won't say it. So I'll say it because I can. So, but thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you all next Wednesday. All right.
Thank you.